Praise the Lord, everybody. Good morning. Welcome back into the house of the Lord. Isn't it good to be in His house? And wasn't last night wonderful? I was praying. I knew He would, but my prayer was that He would confirm all the things we've been saying, all the things I've been preaching and feeling by being present. And He was last night in such a powerful way. And I'm looking forward to what He's going to do today. I think the work's not done for this weekend. As Seth preached, the work's not done. We've got a good way to go. We've got a lot to do, but it's exciting to be where God has placed us and feel like God has a plan for us. This morning, I want to talk to you about three words: desperation, determination, and dedication. And they kind of go in that order, and we'll talk through them. So, looking in the Bible is full of desperation. 1 Samuel 22, I'll give you some examples here. 1 Samuel 22 reads, David departed from there and escaped the cave of Adullam. Of course, this is when David is fleeing from Saul. He's been anointed king, but he's not king. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. So his family joins him. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul. And in case you're wondering, there's that desperation, bitter in soul. I like the way that that's the kind of, that's the direct translation from the Hebrew. That's the literal translation of that word there. Bitter in soul very much describes desperation. So everyone who is in debt, everyone who's in distress, everyone in debt, everyone who is in bitter in soul gathered to him, and he became commander over them. And they were with him about 400 men. So in case you don't remember, David's mighty men were the desperate people that gathered to him looking for a way out, a change. Psalm 22, the psalmist writes, and there's so many examples in Psalms of the psalmist crying out in desperation or, crying tears of desperation or silent because they have no words because they're so desperate. Psalm 25, starting in verse 16, turn to me, be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. The troubles of my heart are enlarged. Bring me out of my distresses. Consider my affliction and my trouble. Forgive all my sins. Consider how many are my foes, and with what violent hatred they hate me. Guard my soul. Deliver me. Let me not be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. May integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait for you. Redeem Israel, O God, out of all his troubles. And we could keep going. Psalm 88 is a great example. Psalm 130 is short. I'll read that one as well. Out of the depths I cry to you. Now, if that doesn't describe desperation, I don't know what is. Right? Desperation, out of the depths. I'm deep, God. I'm buried in the water. I'm at the bottom of the ocean. I'm at the deep part of the ravine. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleas for mercy. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, that you may be feared. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than the watchman for the morning, more than the watchman for the morning. O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is plentiful redemption, and he will redeem Israel from all his iniquities. Desperation. I think most of us are familiar with desperation. It's one of those things that you know the word, and then at some point in your life you experience it, and you feel like, I know what it feels like to be desperate. But it's also one of those things that it seems the older you get, the more responsibility you have, the more you are fully able to feel the weight of something like this when it hits you. The dictionary defines desperate as having lost hope, giving no grounds for hope. It was a desperate situation. There's no hope. I have a desperate need. I've got a need and I have no hope to find it. Moved by despair or the utter loss of hope. Implying or employing extreme methods in an attempt to escape defeat. Desperate. Right? It's not sad. It's not troubled. It's not frustrated. It's not having a hard time. It's not just this is a difficult time through, or I'm trying to figure out. It's no, I have tried to figure out. I've done everything I can. I have no hope left. That's desperation. Desperation is not, I'm worried. Desperation is not, I'm afraid or concerned or angry. It's no hope. So by definition, when we get to desperation, we've exhausted all of our means of helping ourselves, right? There's many ways we get to a place of desperation. We can become trapped by our own choices, sinful or not. We can come under the oppression of other people's choices, of someone who is oppressing us. I think of Israel and Egypt, and through other points in history, you see God's people in desperate situations because of persecution. Although I'll point out that God's people have been in desperate situations many times because of their own choices as well. Sometimes we become overwhelmed just trying to get by on our own. It's not a sinful choice. There's nothing wrong. It's just that life is piling up, and we're trying to shovel our way through it, and the pile keeps getting bigger, faster than we can shovel, and before long we look at it and we think, I have no hope. There's nothing I can do. I have no means at my disposal to get through this. Or sometimes even in what we want to be something hopeful or joyful. We have a goal, and we look at it, and we keep trying for it, and we reach a point where we are just insufficient for the task at hand, and we look, and it's like our hope and our joy and the thing we're longing for turns to bitterness, because when we compare what we were trying to do with what we have to do it with, we realize we have no hope of attaining that. And then sometimes God drives us to desperation. And that's, I think, the most, for me personally, frustrating, because it's like, God, why? I was doing great. I felt like I was doing what you wanted. Life was good, and now something has happened, and I'm faced with this situation, and I can't fix it. I have no hope, and I went from being fine to being desperate, God. And I've taught and preached on desperation in the past, but desperation is a critical junction, right? Desperation brings us to a very important place, because at the point of desperation, like the dictionary said, it's where we employ extreme measures, right? Desperation is a point where we're willing to do anything. And that's the power of desperation, is that it breaks us out of our comfort zone. It puts us in a place where we're willing to consider stuff we would not have considered otherwise, things that we have held on to as part of our identity or as part of what we feel like is critical to us. We get to a place where we realize the road I'm walking with has ended, and there is no path forward with who I am or how I am or what I have. So I've got to change something. And at this point, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm willing to do anything because I'm desperate. But that's also where there's extreme danger, because you're willing to do anything because you're desperate. And the pattern I'm going to talk about today, desperation, determination, dedication, this is something that happens in our life whether we want it to or not. We do this as a part of how we grow and stretch. And the question is, are we going to do it purposefully and consciously, or are we going to do it unconsciously, just following whatever path we fall into? So desperation, critical juncture, because you can either turn to salvation or to destruction. In our desperation, obviously, I'm encouraging you to turn to God. I'm encouraging you to turn to the church. I'm encouraging you to seek spiritual people who will help you find that hope and look for the hope from God. But you don't have to, right? Even in desperation. And I'm thinking here particularly when God takes us to points of desperation, because it's one thing when we can look and we can see, okay, I know how I got here because I made choices. I don't know what to do now. I'm stuck. I'm desperate. But at least I understand what I'm trying to learn. I understand the mistakes I made that got me here. I just don't know how to fix it. But sometimes we get to a point of desperation and we don't know why we're there. And sometimes we feel like, well, God's driving us to desperation. But we don't, even in that point, we don't have to choose God. You don't have to turn it over to Him. God uses circumstances to try and put us in a place where we can learn something, but don't make the mistake of thinking that God is trying to push you into a corner where you have no choice. God is putting you in a desperate situation where you have to make a choice, where you have to reevaluate and decide what really matters and be willing to make extreme changes. But even there, you always have the choice. It's still your free choice. God doesn't maneuver. He's not manipulating us. He's trying to help us. But, when He does this to us, it's because He loves us, right? Proverbs says, don't despise the Lord's discipline. Don't be weary of his reproof. This is in Proverbs 3. For the Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father delights, as a father, the son in whom he delights. So if you feel like God has put you at a place of desperation, you should take hope. You should be encouraged. God has me here on purpose, not just to make me miserable, but because he loves me. He's trying to teach me something. That's also, I think, why, at least for me personally, when God puts me in places of desperation, it's the most frustrating because it's, I like to think that I'm doing pretty good at following what God's told me to do. And, I was raised in a home where I should have learned a lot of things about how you should or shouldn't live for God. And so when I feel like God's put me there, it's like, okay, Lord, what did I miss? Clearly, I've missed something because here I am at this desperate place. And I failed to catch it a couple points because you've probably tried to tell me this and I was too hard-headed and I missed it. I could have saved myself some heartache if I just caught it somewhere, but I'm completely blindsided, God. I don't know what is going on. Help, God, help. That's the cry. In Jesus' name. So why? What good comes from desperation? Why does God use it? Well, we've already kind of touched on some of them. When we're desperate, we're able to listen in a way that we might not have earlier. When we're desperate, we're open to things we wouldn't have been open to otherwise. And it makes us go back and look at, how did I get here, and what do I need to change? The other thing, though, is that desperation gives value to the determination that's going to come afterwards. Because some decisions you can make fairly trivially and decide one way or the other, but when you reach a point of desperation and God delivers you, and you determine in your heart, that's the next step. God delivers you, and you determine in your heart, I'm going to make a change, I'm going to do something differently. Now, that decision has a lot more weight than the one that I was just thinking about back when I was in a good spot, right? When I was just plotting out my life, and I thought, well, do I want to do this or do this? Well, this seems like a good idea, let's do that. When I get to a place of desperation and I back out and God delivers me and I say, no, we're doing this. We're doing this certainly. Well, what? No, I know where that leads. I've been there. I know why this matters because I've been in a place of desperation. Desperation gives value to the determination that comes after. See, the thing is, you don't usually, I've never really seen in my life or in the life of others, very rarely do you escape a desperate situation on your own. It almost always includes outside help. And often that outside help is supernatural. It's almost by definition, right? If it's truly desperate, you've tried everything. You've done everything you can. So when you get in that desperate situation, you can't fix it. You can't get yourself out. You need someone else to help you out of that desperate situation. You need someone to deliver you from the desperate situation. So that brings us to determination, because I think we've all seen how God can deliver. We've all seen and trust that God will provide for us if we turn to him in our desperation, if we give him that brokenness that comes from our desperation and say, Lord, I need you more than anything. I'm willing to set whatever it is aside. Just show me, God, how I can escape this. What do I need to move forward? He promised he would. The psalmist said in Psalm 68, our God is a God of salvation, and to God the Lord belong the deliverances from death. He's the one who can deliver. So when we leave a desperate situation, we should be careful to learn something from it, right? To do so with determination, make a decision. And the classic example in Scripture is in Joshua 24. While we're turning there, while we're pulling it up, the dictionary, again, the definition of the word determine is to fix conclusively or authoritatively, to come to a decision, to determine between options, to make a choice between options. And when I say I am determined, and I put it past tense, this is a decision that has been made. This is a decision that I've come to authoritatively. I've decided this. Joshua 24, starting in verse 14, the context here, this is toward the end of the book of Joshua, and really this is the end of more than just the book of Joshua. This is the end of the whole kind of deliverance arc from Egypt, right? God's people were in a desperate situation in Egypt where they were oppressed by they had gone to Egypt as a means of deliverance from famine, and over time, Egypt had become the place where they were enslaved, and they were slaves to the Egyptians, making bricks for them. And God delivered them from Egypt, and you have this, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the whole Old Testament is leading up to this part. And in Joshua, they finally come through the wilderness. They're delivered through the Red Sea. They're delivered through the wilderness, this long arc where they finally reach the promised land. And y'all know there's a whole bunch more story that comes afterwards. You've got all of Kings and Chronicles, and so the story doesn't end there. But in a very real sense, this is kind of the culmination of that initial promise. I will take you out of Egypt and bring you to the promised land. So here Joshua, at the end of his life, he's looking back at the deliverance that God gave the nation after their desperation. And this is what he says. Now, therefore, fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt. Serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, then you choose this day who you're going to serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river or the gods of the Ammonites in whose land you dwell. You can make whatever choice you want, but as for me and my house, we've made a decision. We're going to serve the Lord. Once you get delivered from a desperate situation, you need to make a determination, make a decision. God, what are you trying to teach me? What should I learn from this? And what am I going to set in stone so I never make it to this place of desperation again? I might find myself in some other desperate situation, but it's not going to be because of this. I learned this, and I'm never coming back here. I've been delivered from it. And that brings us to the third word, dedication. And looking this one up in the dictionary, 2 of the 4 dictionaries I looked at had as either the first or second definition to set apart for a deity or a religious purpose. So the word is still very much rooted in this idea of setting things apart for God. Dedicate, to set apart for a special use, to commit oneself to a particular course or thought of action. So if determination is choosing the direction we're going to go, dedication is both the patterns and things that we set aside that help us to walk that road we've determined to walk, and a reminder on a regular basis of the determination we've made. So once you have determined some things in your life, God has delivered you from desperate situations, you've determined things in your life, you then guard your determination with dedication. There are some things in our life we just need to set aside and dedicate to a specific purpose. And say, this whole area of what I'm doing is just for God, or just for this purpose. Because we've been called out. God has dedicated us as a people for himself. Let me come back there. Let's look at this full pattern and talk about it. The whole thing, if you want to kind of sum up what I'm trying to say this morning, it's that in my desperation, I'm driven to God for deliverance. And my deliverance from the desperation motivates my determination to change my life. And in order to accomplish and sustain my determination, I choose to dedicate things in my life to that purpose. Desperation drives me to God for deliverance. My deliverance motivates me to be determined in making a change. And then I sustain that determination through my dedication. If we want our determination to stick, we have to make some dedications in our life. If we want to make a choice and keep that choice as the days pass, as the weeks pass, as circumstances change, we've got to have some dedications. Again, desperation drives us to a point of reevaluation, of decision. Drives us to make a decision. Because we still feel the pain of the desperation, it's easy to make the decision. It's easy to decide, I don't want to be here ever again. If this is my way out, I'm going to hold on to it. I'm going to grab onto it because I'm desperate. But what's going to happen is you get delivered. And then you're going to be living in peace. And you're going to be living outside this desperate situation. And you made a determination, but that was months ago now. That was years ago now, and God has blessed you, and he's delivered you. And if we're not careful, we forget the pain of the desperation. The things that we dedicate not only serve to guard our determination, they're a reminder of that place of desperation. You know, if you look at the Old Testament, so many of their ceremonies and things that they did, I mean, if you look at the Passover meal, for example, it's not, it would not be my favorite thing to eat, I think. Some of those, like, if you look at all the things they ate, and we talk about bitter herbs, and we know the unleavened bread and the spotless lamb, but there's more. There's bitter herbs. There's things that just aren't pleasant to eat. What was the purpose of those? It was to remind them of what they escaped from. It was to help them have enough of a taste for them to value their freedom, for them to value the deliverance. Because there's just something about us. I don't know if this, I think this is inbuilt in the way God made us, which makes me think, maybe, I don't know, what can I understand about God from this? But because he made us. But we need that duality to understand. We don't really appreciate happiness until we've tasted sadness. We don't really appreciate freedom until we understand what it's like to live in bondage. We don't really appreciate the blessings of God until we've been in a place where we've been without them. So if we let ourselves get in a place where God's delivered us and we don't have some reminder of what we were delivered from and why we chose to live the way we're going to live, we're going to go back because it will lose its value to us. And this very painful lesson that we went through so much to learn, we're going to let go of, and we're going to lose the blessing of. The dedication, the things that we choose to set aside, remind us of what we went through. There's a scripture in 2 Chronicles I want to read. It's an example I don't hear preached or taught very much, but because it's amazing. It's kind of, just ho-hum. This is the way the Old Testament goes. This happens all the time. God just does this. 2 Chronicles 15, the Spirit of God came upon Azariah the son of Oded, and he went out to meet Asa and said to him, this is the king, Asa the king. Hear me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. The Lord is with you while you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. For a long time, Israel was without the true God, and without a teaching priest, and without law. But when in their distress, Israel was far from God. They didn't have a priest to teach. They didn't have the law. And that led them to a place of distress. God allowed them to reach a place of distress because when in their distress they turned to the Lord, the God of Israel, and sought him, he was found by them. In our desperation, we look to God for deliverance. In those times there was no peace to him who went out or to him who came in, for great disturbances afflicted all the inhabitants of the lands. They were broken in pieces. Nation was crushed by nation and city by city, for God troubled them with every sort of distress. But you take courage. Do not let your hands be weak, for your work shall be rewarded. That's the message that the prophet gave to the king. The king's response: as soon as Asa heard these words, the prophecy of Azariah the son of Oded, he took courage and put away the detestable idols from all the land of Judah and Benjamin and from the cities that he had taken in the hill country of Ephraim. And he repaired the altar of the Lord. And he gathered all Judah and Benjamin and those from Ephraim, Manasseh, and Simeon who were residing with them, for great numbers had deserted to him from Israel when they saw that the Lord his God was with him. There's a little subpoint right there. If we in our desperation turn to God and receive his blessing, like David, when I quoted earlier, David's mighty men gathered around him because they were desperate. I mean, if you think about it, David at this point is in no place to be a king of anybody. He's hiding in a cave because he's desperate for his life. And in his desperation, God draws to him others who are desperate because David's turning to God. Because David's taking his desperation and turning it into a determination to do what God wants him to do. And the same thing is happening here with the kingdom of Judah. You have people from the kingdom of Israel who are leaving to come to Judah because they are desperate and they see that God is with Judah. They were gathered at Jerusalem in the 3rd month of the 15th year of the reign of Asa. They sacrificed to the Lord on that day from the spoil that they had brought 700 oxen and 7,000 sheep. And they entered into a covenant. Now, I don't have time to go into all the meanings of a covenant, but a covenant is not just an agreement. It's not just a decision, but it's a binding, contractual type of language. I'm going to do things to you. I have obligations. I'm obligating myself to you, and you are obligating yourself to me. It has significance. This is the way that God works. The whole Old Testament law God called a covenant. The salvation, the grace that we enjoy now is God's new covenant. They entered into a covenant to seek the Lord, the God of their fathers, with all their heart, with all their soul, but that whoever would not seek the Lord, the God of Israel, should be put to death, whether young or old, man or woman. They are serious about this. They are not interested in returning to this place of desperation. They've made a decision, and they have dedicated themselves to it. They swore an oath to the Lord with a loud voice and with shouting with trumpets and horns, and all Judah rejoiced over the oath, for they had sworn with all their heart and had sought him with their whole desire, and he was found by them, and the Lord gave them rest all around. For the remainder of Asa's reign, there's peace. There's not any more, and you can read on in the chapter, the very next thing. We can see examples of this in our own lives and the lives of others. We get driven by desperation because, for example, and as I mentioned, this is a scriptural principle. You're doing this whether you know it or not. The question is, are you conscious of it? Because what happens is we get in desperate situations, we usually end up delivered one way or the other. But a lot of times, as I mentioned, you get in desperation, it's a critical juncture. You can turn to God or you can turn to other things. And other things will often provide a way of escape that leaves you in greater bondage. And you make the decision, and you don't think, no one, to use it as an example, an alcoholic, no one makes a conscious decision to say, my life is horrible, I don't feel I can keep up with it, I'm in over my head, I'm desperate, but I'm going to go drink until I can't feel about it, and then I won't feel bad, and that's a good thing, and that will help me, and that's my conscious choice. No one thinks that purposely, but that's what we do because it's easy, and then it becomes a way of life, and then there's this internal voice that just says, this is who you are. And then they start creating rituals around this. And now alcohol is a part of their life. There's whole parts of their day that are set aside and dedicated to numbing themselves from the pain. Desperation, determination, dedication. Or someone is driven so deep into debt that they can't get out, right? They're in such poverty that it affects their entire life. And whether you get out, actually escape, or whether it's just something you live with, it also leaves the same kind of impression. It changes the way you think. You make decisions to avoid being back in that desperate situation. And you set up habits in your life. Good example. Driven to desperation by debt. Determined because of that, I'm going to do whatever it takes to work my way out of this. I'm going to sacrifice things if I have to. I'm going to find a way to get out of debt. How do you do that? Well, you then make some dedications. This portion of my income, before I spend on anything else, is going straight to my debts. The first X%, I'm going to give tithes, or even outside of a church context, or even someone who just wants to get free of it. That's the pattern. I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to dedicate part of my income to just as much as I can to getting this done. And once I get free, if I'm smart, I keep that dedicated. I no longer have debt, but I'm going to put that aside because I never want to go back. Another example, raising children. There's a lot of examples there, isn't there? It's so amazing. This wonderful blessing that God gives us that drives us to desperation. Oh, God has used you to grow him. But the example I'm thinking of, because I know a number of, I think even brother, what's his name, Dobson, Focus on the Family. This is one of those, in one of his books about raising children, he shares a similar story. Because that's one of the things as a father, it's easy to family's my priority, but I support my family with my work, and I get my priorities out of whack, and we've talked about that. But your son reaches the teen years and starts taking a wrong turn, and, depending on how quickly he's taking a wrong turn, or at some point you get desperate as a dad, as parents. And so dad decides everything else gets set aside. Whatever I got to do, if I've got to take a different job, if I've got to, if I'm traveling for sales, if I need to be home and take something else, this is the most important thing. I've got to fix this. Makes a determination now. I'm going to be there. No matter what it takes, I'm going to be there for my son. I'm going to take the time. Well, how do you do that? Well, you've got to dedicate. I've got to set aside some parts of my life specifically for this. I've got to make sure I'm there. Maybe it's evenings, I'm going to be home for dinner. And we just know that. We're going to have family dinner. Nothing's going to get in the way. That's dedicated to this purpose. Or weekends. I'm going to make sure I take 4 hours just, once a month, twice a month, every week. Whatever I feel like it takes, I'm going to dedicate time to focus on that relationship. That's the pattern. This is a godly pattern. And this is the pattern that God exercises in our life over and over and over. He brings us to a point where we have to ask ourselves, what really matters? I'm desperate, one way or the other. And I reference it because it's been a moment in my life that desperate for revival. I'm desperate to see God do something in this church, in this city, in this part of the world, because I feel like he has his attention here. So if that's the case, if God has taken you to a point of desperation, you look, and I had prepared this before the message last night for you, those of you who were here last night. So I'm not trying to, the same thing happened with sermon. I'm not stealing thoughts. I'm just something's happening. We know God's in it. When you see a mountain, you look for the miraculous miracle of God. When you see a hopeless situation, when you get to a point where you say, I'm desperate, I have no options, I have no hope. I don't know why. That definition of desperation just hits me. I have no hope, because that's the place the enemy wants you to be. That's the place, if he can get you to the spot where you think there is no hope, right? Hope is what keeps us alive. Hope. If you have hope, you can endure anything. But if you don't have hope, you can get knocked over by the next smallest thing. And it seems like you go through seasons in life where you get to a point of desperation. So I just want to give you the map. When you get desperate, you look to God for deliverance. And when God delivers you, you look at what road he's put you on. Okay, God, how did you get me out of there and put me here? What are you changing in my life? What is the thing? I was so desperate, I said anything, God, and you changed something. You said, okay, do this, and I did it, and you miraculously delivered. Well, I'm not just going to then stop doing what you told me to do. If that's what you gave me to deliver me from my desperation, okay, God, I'm going to make a choice. I'm following you. If that was what you told me to do, I'm just going to do that until you tell me to do something else. And not only am I going to make that decision, I'm going to put dedication around it. I'm going to set things aside. There are things about my life that I'm going to change, not because they were bad, but because for me, you gave me this path. I'm going to walk that path, and I'm going to make the changes necessary to keep walking that path. A couple things I'll point on before we close. If you go through this enough, sometimes it's amazing how we can't help but change. We can't help but adapt to what we've been put in. And so God will put us in circumstances to grow us in ways we would never think, but he knows we're going to adapt to the circumstances, whether we want to or not. And so in the same way that, sometimes people will adapt negatively, if you do this enough where you get put in a place of desperation and you seek God for deliverance, you make a determination, I'm going to continue where he's put me, and you put dedication around it, sometimes when you get to the place of desperation, it's actually a huge relief because you've seen it coming. Something's not working, you're getting frustrated, and you're trying to fix it, and it's not fixing itself, so you try something else, and that's not fixing it. And when you reach the point of desperation, truly like, I have no hope, it's like, oh, okay, this is a God thing to fix. It's not, he's gonna make a way. Okay, great. There's a relief sometimes at reaching the point where something has to change. Okay, I can't keep struggling like this. It's untenable. It can't keep going like this. God, I think I'm at that point, God. I'm ready for you. I think I'm at the mountain, God. I'm ready to see your miracle. And you almost get excited because again, we don't operate by this world's principles. We live in this world, but we're not of this world. So when we see situations like that, we should at some point get to know God well enough and trust him enough that it's almost like this unconscious, subconscious thing that I recognize I'm at one of those points. I'm at one of those miracle points where God is going to do something miraculous. The other thing I want to point before we close here is that when you make that determination and dedication, you should expect to struggle. You should expect to fail. And that can be really discouraging because you just got delivered from this desperate situation and you're being a good, trying to follow what God said and said, okay, I know this pattern, so now that I'm delivered, I'm going to make some changes and I'm going to dedicate myself to those changes. But then what always happens, especially if it's something spiritual and God's trying to change your life, is you fail. You mess up. Maybe one of the things that I was going to dedicate, I'm just going to set aside this hour of my day every day to pray, or I'm just going to set aside this hour to read, pray and read my Bible, or I'm going to set aside one day a week to fast. You make some dedications to remind yourself of what God's doing, and then you miss it, and you fail. And it's easy to think, well, I'm headed right back to that place. And no, just get back up. Don't let one or two things knock you off your game, because you have to know that's going to happen. Right? We've made a big change. You're trying to alter the course of your life. God's delivered you, but you've got some momentum to address here. And every time that we determine to take something away from our flesh and give it to God, we should expect our sinful desires to rebel. We should expect to have to deal with that struggle of the flesh versus the spirit. We should know that it's not going to be just God delivered us, but now I've got to do the work of changing my heart, of changing my life. And if we fail in our dedication, it's not an indication of God's inability or unfaithfulness to us, or an indication that we're unredeemable. It's just a reminder of the constant need to surrender to him. Because that's the thing that the world misses, is that this really only works if we recognize that he's the one in control. If I let go of my kind of innate selfishness and arrogance, we're all arrogant. It's just we think we can direct our own lives. We're arrogant in this fundamental sense. We think that we are equipped to handle our own lives. And you feel like you should, right? I'm an adult. I should be able to manage myself. But the reality is, without him, we're not. So we get in a place of desperation where we have to recognize that we need him more than anything else. And he delivers us. So if you fail in your attempt to stay faithful to the things that you've put in place, to guard your determination, to make sure you're going the way you want to go, if you fail, use that just as a reminder. You know what? It's not about me. I'm doing my bit. This is to help me be connected to him. And if I fall, and that only reminds me all the more that it's not, if I fast one day a week, it's not my fasting makes me ultra holy. It's not that my praying on a regular basis makes me super spiritual. If I mess up, it just reminds me it's about him. Right. Let me get back on it. Let me get back in the process. Right. Let me pick it back up. Expect to struggle and fail. So, we heard it last night. When you see a mountain, look for the miracle. That is, your mountain is your miracle. And I want to follow that this morning on a practical sense. When you reach a point of desperation, what you should do is look to God for deliverance. And when God has delivered you, make up your mind, determine in your heart to continue on the path that God has placed you on. The changes he made, accept them as part of who he wants you to be. And then find some things you can dedicate in your life to keep you on that path. And God will grow you, and he will take you to a place you look back 5 years later and you say, how did I get here? Well, God brought you to a point of desperation. He changed your trajectory, and you followed it. So that's the message I have for you this morning. I'm excited about what God is going to do. We're going to take a couple minutes here before we enter into worship. Thank you so much for your attention.